Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming this morning and taking time out of your day. We might have a few more folks trickling in, so I might be staring at the attendees to let them in. Let's see, so before I go over the agenda and everything, I'm gonna hand it over to Megan just to welcome everyone and we can get started. Let's see. Can't hear you, Megan, but let's see. Okay. Can somebody else unmute?
Hi, sorry.
There we go. Okay.
All right. It said that it wouldn't let me unmute, but now I think so.
Can everybody unmute?
Thank you for being here for meeting number 2. It's good to see, I see one new face, so that's great. How do you feel? Am really glad and hopeful for us to go forward in this work, particularly with some sort of exciting news from the legislature. Thank you for all that you do, and let's get to work and let's figure out the best way that we can house as many people as we can as we deal with this crisis for our city.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we want to do introductions real quick? Just to...
Sure. I know we did a more lengthier version last time. Do we want to just go around and do name, affiliation, and maybe just say one of the things that you're hoping to achieve today? And I can start with Brianna.
Hello, Brianna Manfres. I'm with Pinnacle Architecture. And I guess today I'm just really excited about talking about sort of the components of the zoning and some of the additional information and research I've been finding in various locations. So, yeah.
That's great. Kathy?
Hi, Kathy Austin, local architect, member of the Ben's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. And I had sent Suzanne a bunch of resources and she was kind enough to forward to you. Just really looking forward to kind of coming up with creative solutions here. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Kathy. Stacy?
Good morning, everyone. Stacy Whitty, and I'm from REACH, and I am just excited to have the conversation to start looking at new options for our unhoused community members. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Stacy. Scott?
Hi, yeah, Scott Winters with a local architecture firm and also chair of the Planning Commission. And I'm excited to delve into kind of design options and some of the code today as well. So, yeah.
Scott, are you on Tatooine?
I am.
Just checking. I was at the original premiere of Star Wars, so I just had to throw that in there. I'm old enough to have been to the premiere.
Yeah, I couldn't quite make it.
Barb.
Barb Campbell, Bend City Council. I made it to the 30th anniversary celebration, but not the premiere.
Dana.
Hi, I'm Dana Richards, member of Housing for All and Homeless Leadership Coalition. I'm also looking forward to looking closer at code and all the possibilities for shelters here in Bend.
Great. Hans?
Hans Jorgensen, Neighborhood Leadership Alliance Chair. In particular, today I'm interested in what peer cities are doing. I found that information really maybe a chance to get a leg up on some of this work. So looking forward to exploring that among other things today.
Michaela, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Michaela Oliver, Community Relations Manager with the city. Just really looking forward to talking about some of the cool ideas that are happening around the nation. So we will have good discussion.
Let's see, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Baker. I'm the Affordable Housing Coordinator for the City of Bend.
Rachel. Let's see, Pauline.
Morning, Pauline Hardy, City Planning Department. I'm just going to help you all write the code. Thanks.
That's important. Lynn.
Hi, everyone. Lynn McConnell. I'm the city's Affordable Housing Manager. Glad to be here and supporting all of you.
And let's see, my screen just shifted. Eric.
Good morning, Eric Tobiasen, President of the Bend Heroes Foundation and Program Manager for the Veterans Village under construction. Hope to share our experiences at the front end of our project when we were going through the code and identifying some of the text amendments that would need to be made and other zoning issues. So happy to share the experience and learn and help.
Thank you, Eric. Let's see, who have I not done yet? Elizabeth.
Good morning, everyone. Elizabeth Oshel, Associate City Attorney. I will be helping Pauline with code drafting and answering questions as they come up. It's nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Let's see. Juan, did you want to give us a quick intro again?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Juan Olmeda, City's IT Operations Manager, just here to provide some tech support for your virtual meetings.
Thank you. Kayla?
What do they have? Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Duddy, and I'm the Deputy City Recorder for the City Manager's Office, and I will be taking your minutes.
Thank you, Kayla. And last again, but not least, we have our leader, Susanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward today to getting your feedback on the types of kind of housing shelter buckets that we're looking at. So we as staff can take that back and kind of figure out what zoning districts best suit those and start working on standards to bring back to you. And I have to say, I think I don't know if I was at the premiere of Star Wars, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was in line at Star Wars when I was in junior high, and Jerry Brown and Linda Ronstadt were behind me and my friends.
Oh, that is totally cool.
I know, isn't that funny? It could have been the premiere. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
I was in Boston for the premiere, so.
Oh, neat. Wow. Okay. Anyhow, okay. Let me, we could talk a whole meeting about Star Wars and all that stuff. So anyhow, we'll do that another time. So let me go ahead and share the screen with the presentation. Up here. Okay. So can everyone see that? I'm going to turn it into this mode too. All right. So here we are, second meeting. So thanks everyone again for coming. Just an overview of the agenda before we get started. We've got some housekeeping. We'll go through the minutes and then we'll have public comment. There's a few people in the lobby. So I think there's about 5 people. And so I'll ask you in a second if you're here for public comment or just to kind of hang out and listen. We're going to talk a little bit about some public involvement and community surveying that's already occurred with the city with regard to houselessness and providing different housing types for folks. And then talk about the pending state legislation. That'll take all of a minute because it's moving pretty quick. And then we'll go into the discussion and overview of peer city shelter types and zoning districts, kind of talk about some examples from the memo I sent out and other things, and make sure we're thinking about the right buckets of types of shelter as we move forward. So does that sound good with everyone? Okay, and feel free to unmute and you know, jump in because I can't see everybody's Facebook boxes or whatever. So So,
hey, Susan.
Yeah.
I wanted to, this is Brianna. I just wanted to, I have a couple, probably more questions than I do answers. And I was just curious as far as the format, when that would be best for just looking at the, in the agenda, there was the 2 items that we wanted to focus on. When would that be best fit into the overall?
So the 2 items, the zoning discussion?
It was focusing on the housing types and what we should provide, and then the zoning districts and where it was in the agenda. I think the overview that you had sent out.
I think probably down, I didn't number this, but if you can see my arrow, this discussion overview of peer cities, shelter types, and zoning districts.
Perfect.
Then, yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Sound good? Okay. Before we go to public comment, we sent out the draft minutes, and I know they're brief. We typically are making minutes now for committee meetings, just sort of like the basics, because we get into this gray area of actually doing a full transcript to capture everything everybody said, but legally we're required to just sort of like do the overview of the agenda, who was there, and then any major decisions. We have posted a link to the video on the website, and we can also post the transcripts of the meetings if people want more thorough record of that. So just wanted to explain, and I don't know if Elizabeth, if you have anything else to add on the minutes format before we go to approving minutes.
No, you got it, but if anyone has any questions, we can answer them.
Okay, so does anyone want to move, or does anyone have any questions? And we can move to approve the minutes.
I'm happy to move the approval.
Okay.
I'll second.
So maybe we can do a hand vote, I guess. Okay, I think I'm seeing everybody's hands, yes, okay. Okay, so approval of the minutes. So why don't we go now to public comment. Folks that are in the lobby, can you raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment right now? Let's see. Shoot. Sorry. So Mike Satcher, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. My comments can be really brief. First, I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I appreciate how receptive you were to public comment at the last meeting. My only comment is, and this is just one person's opinion, would it be possible in the future to have the public comment section at the end rather than the beginning, so that those of us in the public who are coming in and observing the work you're doing will have something to comment on? I just feel like it might be more useful at the end of the meeting than at the beginning. So, and again, that's just one person's opinion. So that's all I had to say.
Okay, great. And we can do it both ways. We initially had it at the end, and then I moved it to the beginning. So yeah, either way. And actually, if we have time at the end of the meeting, we can provide another public comment period. Okay, Charles, I'm gonna allow you to talk. Okay, Charles. Okay, we'll come back to you. How about Tom? Oh, Charles. Hello. No, can't hear you. Kind of muffled. Okay, why don't we come back to you, Charles? How about Tom Gugg? I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Hi, yeah, Tom Gugg. I'm a homeowner in the Larkspur neighborhood. And I have a question regarding the overlap between the temporary housing code changes that have already been passed by City Council on April 7th, which were fairly substantial in terms of where temporary housing is allowed within the city, among and other aspects around temporary housing. So I'm curious about the overlap between the code changes on April 7th that already passed versus this whole process. So it almost would seem like this is after the code changes have already been implemented, passed, and are in effect in the City of Bend code. So if anyone can address that question, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Before we get to Tom's question, does anyone else, I don't see any other hands raised. Okay. Let me go back to Juan, can you, okay, there we go, great. Okay, so Tom, to answer your question, I might have Pauline Hardy or Elizabeth Oshel weigh in. I think the code changes you were talking about speak specifically to the type of housing that we're calling short-term shelter. And Elizabeth, I see you nodding your head. So I'm gonna let you talk, actually.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. I'm sure you would have gotten it as well. So the code changes that were just passed by council were what we were referring to as sort of short-term quick strike changes. We have an existing definition of temporary housing in the code, and it was regulated or is regulated in a certain way. And so the changes that were passed by council and are in effect now simply expanded where that existing definition of temporary housing could be located in the city without a conditional use permit. So it was sort of a short-term, very specific change to only the location that type of housing would be allowed. This process is meant to look more broadly. Are there different types of short-term housing or shelters that should be allowed more specifically? And are there specific regulations for different types of shelter housing that should be in place in different areas around the town? So if this process moves forward, the concept would be whatever this committee comes up with would sort of replace the changes that were made by council in April as a larger look at more broadly, how do we regulate short-term shelters and short-term housing throughout the city on a more broad and specific level. So I hope that answers the question.
Tom, did that answer your question? Tom, are you unmuted now? Can you unmute?
Now I'm unmuted. Did you?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's an answer, I guess, but it requires some understanding of the intricacies. I mean, for instance, you're saying that you're sort of indicating that it was temporary, but my understanding is that it's not temporary, it's permanent part of the city code, like the conditional use. So, and I don't want to sidetrack and get involved in that, but so is my question answered? Sort of, but I think there's more to it than that. But again, I don't want to sidetrack, so let me answer yes.
Okay, we can talk to you offline. I think the term temporary, it's I've had to have this explained to me too. It's a permanent building with the use is temporary, is meant for temporary transitional use. I don't know if that makes sense, but the building, the people using it are intended to be transitional, not there for permanent.
Right, the temporary use is 18 to 24 months, but the facility itself is permanent.
Right.
Right, the changes, for instance, the conditional use permit was removed. There is no more conditional use in commercial districts within the city of Bend, throughout the city of Bend. That was removed. So, I mean, it pretty much allows temporary housing to go anywhere in commercial districts or I think it's MU, the multi-urban or zones. That's already been done. So, but if this process is now going to walk those back, which is one part of the answer, then that's, you know, different. So it's fine. I just wanted to ask the question and see what kind of answer there was for it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Susanna, sorry, just for clarity, the code amendment that Tom's talking about, remove the conditional use permit in the commercial limited and general commercial zoning districts. It still is not allowed in the convenience commercial, and it's a conditional use permit in the central business district still.
Okay, thanks. Okay. All right, so let's go on. If there's no other questions, let's go on to the next agenda item. I don't have a bunch of PowerPoint slides for this, but just wanted to talk a little bit about our plan for community involvement. Actually, I'm going to share this real quick, just because I think Hans brought it up last meeting, sort of the desire to have a little more community feedback as we're writing the code amendments, which you know, makes sense. We're on a little bit of a fast track, but so I thought it would be useful just to talk a little bit about the overall plan for the sounding board's work again. So we're actually meeting two, but we're sort of blending these two into one. We'd intended on having some community outreach on either drafts at that point or kind of concepts. And I think we'll be ready to do that probably. And then going into the summer, I don't think this is set in stone so much. I think that there'll be an opportunity back and forth for public input on the language through a number of things. And Michaela's going to talk about some work that the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance did earlier this year regarding the shelter, the managed camp concept that we were talking about up at Juniper Ridge. There was a lot of outreach done at that point, and we have some good stuff on that we'll send out to you all after the meeting. We are starting council subcommittees up again. So I don't know if folks are aware, but in the past, sometimes council meetings there's so much on the agenda that we started a couple of years ago doing these smaller subcommittees. So the council is split up into these two subcommittees. One is community building and one is stewardship. Stewardship is more like environment, sustainability, although they do talk about homelessness, houselessness and services. And then community building is more land use. And so those are a smaller group. And I think on the community building subcommittee is where this would go to. And I think we're going to start the first meeting at the end of May or early June. And it's intended to kind of have an opportunity for counselors to ask questions about things moving forward. And there's always public comment at those. So that's another opportunity for public involvement and vetting. And then I'm working with our Office of Performance Management to develop a online survey format. If you've seen any of the story map websites that we have, we had one for the neighborhood street safety program projects. It's basically a website with tabs where I can show images or describe a concept of housing and then ask some questions about it on the side. And that I should be able to have up and running by the end of May. So I was thinking I could work with you all to get input on the questions to ask and the types of information that we're displaying. So anyway, that's just a concept I've been thinking about, and then we can get good information from there. And then otherwise, I think we could probably push something out, more of a paper type survey through the NLA or other mechanisms. So those are just a few concepts. Let me stop sharing. I wanted Michaela to talk about the NLA survey and what was done for that, but I think we'll be able to sort of get community involvement along the way from a number of different methods. So Michaela, I may hand it off to you. Okay.
Thanks, Susanna. So I am also the staff liaison to the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. And we have, I mean, we're a relatively new committee. So we started out in 2018 drafting our guidelines and policies. And then this last couple of years have just been getting up on our feet and going. And so what we have done to gather feedback, because a lot of the time I hear from our reps that, you know, there's a lot of people to represent in a neighborhood association and they want to make sure that they're doing that accurately. And so we have kind of created this process where we keep an eye out on what is coming down the line for policy changes, for you know, hot topics, and then we invite staff and community folks from to the NLA to talk to the committee about those issues, kind of give them a broad background on what we're looking at. And in this case, the NLA heard from Carolyn Egan and other city staff back in October about the Juniper Ridge feasibility study for doing a transitional shelter site in that area. And so after we had Susanna come and do a sorry, I said Susanna because I was looking at you, Carolyn come and do a presentation with the NLA. We did a short, I would call it an abbreviated memo of what was shared during those presentations. And then we crafted about 5 questions. And this was an effort between the NLA chairs and city staff to say, what do we want to know from the community as we approach this issue? And so together, and I'm going to share my screen, we put together this sort of, like I said, abbreviated memo with some discussion prompts. One thing that's, I would say, unique about the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance is that they are one representative from each of the 13 neighborhood associations. And so the way that this works is that they would get these discussion prompts and they would take it back to their board. And if there's enough time, they could survey their members in any way that they want to see what the responses are from the community, or they could talk amongst their board members if they have a good feeling of where people are at and submit these back to the NLA. So with this discussion prompts, we start out with the introduction, brief synopsis of the presentation, and we provided them with the recording for the presentation in case they wanted to get into the details. And then we provided some action options for the NLA. So the NLA, being an advisory committee, at that time had heard from the Boyd Acres Neighborhood Association about the Juniper Ridge proposal, about how they felt that they were caught off guard. And so we wanted to see if there was a consensus among the neighborhood associations that the process was maybe out of order, or if we could have done better. And so you'll see a variety of options. Option 1, the NLA takes no action as the transitional shelter site at Juniper Ridge is not feasible at this time. So they wouldn't even continue the conversation just because that site was not selected. The second was that the NLA supports the city's efforts to find a solution. The third was that the NLA supports the concerns of Boyd Acres on the process and requests City Council to inform the NLA and neighborhood associations of efforts prior to public engagement. The NLA requests that the city engage the NLA in the upcoming process for amending the development code. Here we are. And so I think we gave them a lot of options. Option 5 was that the city, or the NLA, requests the city abandon the idea of managed camps. And so we also put with this, these options, 5 questions that we wanted them to look at. And this was something, like I said, the NLA chairs and then staff worked on to say, what do we really want to know from the community without wanting to increase expectations or give unreasonable expectations of what can and cannot be commented on. And so the way that we did this was we asked, as the city pursues the managed camp concept, what do you think will ensure the community members feel heard? One of the complaints that we had been hearing was that they wanted a way to provide input and didn't think that the listening sessions and 3-minute time slots at council were enough. what would make you feel comfortable having a managed camp in your neighborhood? What would make you concerned? What I thought was interesting is a lot of the things that we had already been talking about as a city were addressed in this. So they had a large consensus that they wanted security. They wanted it to be safe around schools, that they wanted it to be managed and maintained so that it wasn't just a camp without any sort of oversight. For question 3, we asked, what should the city's role be in working on the complex societal issues of affordable housing and homelessness? We heard from the neighborhoods that they think the city should be, the collaborator, the person that's bringing these groups together, providing funding where possible, and trying to explore solutions without having to take on the actual overseeing of something like this. So partnering with Neighbor Impact and other community groups. And then for question 4, we said, which of the NLA action options provided are most appealing to you? I can tell you that of the 13 neighborhood associations, all chose, only one chose that they did not want managed camps anywhere in the city. There were plenty of people who really erred on the side of, we want to be compassionate, but we also want to be smart about the policies that we're putting in place. And so the options 2, 3, and 4, which is really saying, can you please involve us in this process, was kind of the general ask of the NLA. And then let's see. So we provided a tentative timeline for them to respond to that. And so, yeah, I have the really in-depth responses. Susanna just kind of wanted me to give an overview of what we had, put together and how it worked. So we're happy to send out those in-depth responses later for you. And I can also send out the snapshot, which just kind of highlights what the themes were in the responses that we received.
Anyone have any questions for Michaela? The survey, the information, it's a lot, and it's really interesting stuff as we think about, beyond the super siting bills that are likely to be passed. How do we provide opportunities for folks who are houseless right now, and be able to kind of make the neighborhoods okay with them, with the different types of development. So we're likely not going to make everybody happy, but the information that Michaela gathered was really interesting and might be a good place to start as we start talking about that. Does anyone have any questions? We can send it out after.
Yeah, Kathy.
Yeah, hi, I have a question. I think one of the things that is really important about your position, Michaela, and our work with the NLA is identifying what concerns might be dissolved based on additional information, having sort of a two-way communication street of, I think that in my informal conversations with people that I know, there's a lot of misunderstanding about who the homeless population is, or where they're coming from, whether they're employed or not realizing there's a lot of children, all that kind of stuff is really important to communicate back out. So we're listening to their concerns, but I want to make sure we're also communicating who it is that we're trying to help and what their real lives are like. So yeah, I'm just hoping that it's a two-way conversation.
Absolutely. We actually, after we received these responses, we did invite the Homeless Leadership Coalition to come and do a presentation at an NLA meeting following receiving these, and then provided some information to the neighborhoods. It also helped us, my role is in the communications department at the city. And so understanding where some of the concerns were and knowing that we already were thinking about some of these things really helped us frame our communications back out to the community to help make sure that some of those concerns they realize are already being addressed. So thank you for that. And I definitely agree, two-way communication is very important.
If I can just step in, this is Stacy. One of the messages that I think would be really helpful to give to community members is that once the managed camp is up and going, if that's the route that's taken, is to really discuss the case management piece and the ongoing support out at this program. Because I think there's this feeling that we're just going to deliver and drop off items to people, but I think it's important to help people understand in our housed community that we're working on other goals such as housing, employment, getting a driver's license or birth certificate, those types of things. And I think that ongoing engagement is really important that we message that.
Thank you. Yeah.
If I could add, and I have to apologize, I lost contact for a few minutes, so if my comments seem out of touch, that's why. To Kathy's point, we talked about humanizing. I think that's important, and I wonder if part of that isn't, I don't know exactly the best way to present the demographics, but I think there certainly is a perception by many of the public, and the perception is that, 99% of the houseless are this, or 75% of the houseless are that, and we kind of need to dispel that. We need to put maybe not real faces, or maybe real faces. And I'm not trying to launch a whole separate campaign, but I think that educational piece is missing. I think the importance that was just made about coordinated entry, I think we kind of collectively, maybe we didn't vote on this, but I think we all see the value in coordinated entry. The navigation center, I think there's some table setting, some framing we can do here to really get people to, for lack of a better term, calm down a little bit and see more of the pieces that are still dynamic, but to understand that, there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of resources, and we're just trying to coordinate a good deal of this. So I think that education humanizing piece is still really important to help the public better understand, help the 99% understand the situation of the 1%.
Brianna.
So one of the things that keeps coming up in a lot of the conversations, and my mom actually works for the city of Eugene, so it was really relevant, a lot of the examples that were shared. But so I keep picking her brain about what they've been doing and how they approach it. But the term that keeps coming up is it's the layers of an onion. And I think, each of these groups and how this is approached, we're only talking, you have to break it down because it's so complex, and each of these pieces integrated together can help provide the overall solution. And I think we have to keep in mind that we can't get hung up on one objective or solution because they all have to work together in order to solve the whole problem. So I think each of these pieces are really important, and as we break them down, it's just good to keep in mind that there's other things that are surrounding it that are going to help it make it successful.
Yeah. Dana?
I just want to add to what Stacy said. Something that's helpful in reminding people of the humanism aspect and that these are our neighbors. When I was managing Kenton Women's Village, I was very active in the neighborhood association, and so would meet with them monthly and talk about successes that were getting those IDs and getting jobs and getting people housed. And we were also very involved in our neighborhood. Obviously folks are autonomous and this isn't a requirement, but it's just really great to remember that folks are our neighbors, and it's not just putting something in your neighborhood. It's like integrating folks into the thread of care and dignity, and just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Megan.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what everyone is saying here. What I'm seeing as a counselor, with emails and communications that I'm getting, it really is becoming an us versus them. And we have to figure out, I spent a lot of time trying to think about how, as a council and as a city, we really do need to do, for lack of a better word, a marketing campaign. We need a marketing campaign to to humanize our neighbors and to get people to understand that it's not us versus them, you know, that we're all here as Bendites. And so any ideas that you all have for that, as things that we can do as a city or as a council, I would love to hear them.
Could I make a suggestion? In our last meeting, I had communicated a bit with a gentleman who had been online, and he forwarded to me a video called People of New York, which some of you may be familiar with. And it's showing the true faces of the people who are homeless in the community. And I think if the city has the funds through their communication department to put together either a slideshow or a video, if you can get people to be comfortable enough to share their stories, I think that would be extremely helpful. You know, there's a lot of mothers with children that are homeless, and almost a large percentage are working in the community, have family in the community. They're from Central Oregon. They're not coming from someplace else. Unfortunately, what a lot of people see are the travelers on the corners with their signs, and they think that's 100% representative of the homeless community. And so if there's an opportunity to create something like that, I think that would go a long way, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, and seeing the kind faces of the people who are, you know, our neighbors would really go far.
That's a great idea. Michaela, do you have thoughts on that? Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we love that idea. And I think that, you know, everything that you guys are sharing is really great. So all I can say is I'll take some notes, and as this group progresses and as our actions form, we'll consider doing some sort of communications campaign, or see how we can help in that area.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think not only is it important to educate the public, but I also think the kind of city services. I saw some internal memos recently from the Bend Police Force regarding homelessness, and there was some pretty disturbing comments in there. And I feel like these are the people who are, you know, protecting and serving. They're interacting with a lot of these houseless people, and, you know, seeing comments comparing services to feeding bears in a national park is it's a little hard to take. And I don't want to paint the whole. I mean, this is not representative of everyone on the police force, but I think that there needs to be education with that entity as well, because that's to protect and serve. They need to be held to a little bit of a higher standard. And again, these are entities that are interacting with the houseless population, and I think that it's not just the public; it's also our civil servants.
Scott, I sent an email to the chief of police on that very topic, because you're right, in education. The comment I made was, you know, if there was racial bias in a department, you need to work on it. If there's bias against our houseless neighbors, you need to work on it, and it needs to be something that you do. So I'll be continuing to follow up with Chief Krantz on that.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on public involvement ideas before we move off of this? Again, we'll send out the survey. I also wanted to just, we have a community survey that we do every 2 years. Let's see, I'm not sure if you can see that where the Zoom bar is, but if you can see the graphics here to the right, these are just snapshots from the community survey. Yeah, Michaela, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we do it every 2 years. It's done by pretty much the same firm, and they ask kind of the same baseline questions. And usually housing and traffic is usually the highest in the past few years, but in January, the results housing is on top now, on top of traffic. And then this was the first time that people had mentioned homelessness and hunger in our survey. That had never really shown up before. And then another slide talked about, usually transportation is the highest, but you can see that now social issues is being brought up too. And that was the first time we'd seen that in our community survey. So definitely our community is changing and is noticing more that we need to provide more social type services, which we haven't traditionally done. We were very focused on basic services just because of our tax rate being low. And I think we're starting to evolve and get more into that arena of social services. So I just wanted to share that. And let's see, so we'll just stay in touch on the public involvement aspect of all of this and the community surveying. On the online survey I'll be doing, I should have some kind of snapshot to share next time. And I think it's important, as everyone has kind of alluded to humanize pictures of the homeless. So I think on the images I'm showing, I'll make sure to provide some background information on the demographics of the homeless folks we're seeing in our community. And then, you know, it's just show the different varied family makeup and things like that. So anyone, I can't see anybody, so feel free to unmute and just speak if you have something else to say before we move on. Oh, okay. Let's see. So just a real quick update on the legislation on House Bill 2006 and 3261. Apparently 3261 is on the governor's desk, ready to sign. So that's the one that will provide supersiding really ability for a hotel or a motel to be changed into a homeless shelter regardless of land use. And so that is moving along. That's Project Turnkey. That's the one we were hoping to get funding for, but we didn't make the final cut. But in Redmond, it's been funded. The Bethlehem Inn, you probably saw just yesterday, I think, was announced to be awarded funding for that, which is really exciting. And then 2006 is basically what we are discussing. So the different types of shelters, managed camps, microsites, the tiny home veterans village type of concept would be automatically, would be able to go in. It would have to meet building codes, but not land use. So that could go into any zoning district. It would still need adequate transportation access to commercial and medical services and would not pose an unreasonable risk to health and safety. So that is moving along too. I think it made it out of the Senate committee, and I think it's moving along. So it could be approved or signed just this week or next week. Barb, did you have a question?
Thank you, Susanna. I thought that HB 2006 didn't change industrial zones. I thought industrial zones still were not allowing any kind of housing or shelter.
I'll check on that. Elizabeth, okay. Do you know, or Lynn? I thought it was any zoning district.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I think it does have some limitations on certain industrial, but I'm pretty sure it's only heavy industrial.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll look into that, Councilor Campbell.
Sort of, and on the parallel track is Senate Bill 8, which is an affordable housing supersiting bill, which would, in the current version, allow for use siting in industrial locations. So all of the same sort of parameters are in place. There has to be transportation. It has to be safe. It can't be in a goal protected area like a flood zone, things like that. But that may also be sort of what you're thinking about, Barb, because that is running parallel and will do very similar things for affordable housing generally, which would include shelters, as these bills do for shelters.
Okay. Any more questions on that? before we move on? I don't see any, so.
Susanna, I just wanted to clarify also, while Bethlehem Inn was funded for a turnkey purchase in Redmond, those funds are not completely expended, and as directed by council, I think staff continues to try and look for other properties that may work and be eligible for turnkey funding. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, great. So moving on, this is where I tried to provide a background memo. There's a lot you can write about this that other peer cities are doing. So what I put together was based on just a few Oregon communities. I find sometimes it's helpful to look at other places and what they've done, but Oregon has a pretty specific land use system, as most of you know. So sometimes it makes more sense just to look in our own state, but there's certainly a lot of different options out there. And really what I wanted to do in this next part is drill down a little bit into this shelter type, this first column, and just get everybody's feedback. We talked a little bit about this last time, but we didn't really go super deep into it, but just making sure that when you look at another community and you see some cool project, do we have the right categories to allow that good project to proceed? So just starting to solidify, are these the right categories that we've thought of? We've done some work behind the scenes to kind of identify these and try and think about, well, would this project fit into this bucket or would that project? So I'm just going to go through these in detail, and really our goal, kind of the sounding board's role, is to fill in that table from the memo. So it's the blue table. So do these uses go in? And then there's all the zoning districts across the top. It's kind of hard to show both on the screen, but that's basically what we're going to be doing. And then as they go into the zoning districts, are there standards that we should be looking at, like buffering, fencing? You know, is there a maximum number of beds that should be allowed in a facility in commercial versus residential, things like that? Salem has done some work on that, which was shown in the memo. So, but the goal for today is really to identify, are these the main buckets? And then we'll work to bring you back the next meeting, the zoning districts, and talk about like what would make this okay in a residential district as opposed to a commercial district, things like that. So Kathy, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I wanted to suggest perhaps one other different shelter type. I've seen an excellent presentation on this in a parcel in Portland, where it's permanent housing for the homeless in, so rather than short-term shelter permanent facility, it's a permanent facility, but individuals are allowed to stay, and in some cases they pass away due to health concerns, so they're there for the rest of their lives, which often isn't very long, but they're not forced to find another spot to move to, but it is designated specifically for the houseless population. And I didn't know if that would be appropriate to have as a category or not.
Yeah, would that fall into just, let me scroll down here. Let's see, we've got outdoor shelter. So it would be sort of like this. What would make it different than just, hey, an apartment building? Maybe Pauline or Elizabeth could weigh in. Is it just,
it would be more like a micro unit type of development, and it would be a permanent shelter as opposed to what you're seeing here.
Okay.
Kathy, if I can tie into that a little bit, and I'm probably the least knowledgeable of everyone here, but watching the presentation that FHCO made to AHAC last October that Susanna included, I think one of the things this reminds me of is the fact that this permanent type of housing, in some cases for people with disabilities or other limitations, it speaks to that protected class aspect. And as I watched that presentation, I was curious, I think that somewhere in here, I suppose, fair housing and protected classes has a place in this conversation, not just in terms of the types of shelters, but in terms of legal compliance and something that we may need to share with the public, that we have, there are guardrails to this work that we are doing, and there are things that we must do. And then we have a little bit of latitude on codes, but there are many compliance issues we need to consider as a group and as a community. And I just don't have the knowledge to know how they all apply, but I think this is one segue into some of those considerations of protected classes, fair housing, goal 10, disparate impact, those sorts of things that we haven't yet discussed.
Okay, Stacy?
In Washington State, in King County, they have permanent housing with time-limited subsidies. So someone who would go into housing would pay 30% of their income, whether that's from disability, SSI, SSDI, and then the subsidy can last 2 to 5 years. And then, but the person could stay permanently in that apartment or unit. So the unit, the housing is permanent, but the subsidy is time limited. And I haven't seen many models like that here, but I know that's a model that they do use in Washington State. And the one caveat to that is that case management continues through that person's apartment or housing. So we just it's a little different than rapid rehousing. It gives a person a longer time to get that stability and that foundation.
Okay. Yeah. Pauline, do you have any ideas, or Elizabeth or Lynn, on a category that would capture those? I guess it would be maybe a long-term shelter type of thing, microsite.
Just from a development code perspective, I guess I'd have to figure out the difference between deciding an apartment complex somewhere. We don't control how that apartment complex is run. So whether it's permanent or temporary within the apartment complex, as long as it meets standards for apartment complex, I don't see why they couldn't do it today, or even a micro unit for that matter. There might be some different requirements if it's for the houseless, possibly like parking requirements. But other than that, I would think they could still do it today under an apartment complex. I could be wrong. So Elizabeth?
No, I think that's right, Pauline. I think where the subsidy comes in is maybe through some other programs the city runs that Lynn is connected to. So the affordable housing fee or CDBG funds or other types of subsidies that serve to lower the operating costs for the building owner or the operator that allow then lower rents to be charged. And those are typically recorded as permanent or long-term deed restrictions against the property that require lower rents in different configurations, depending on what the operator of the building wanted to do. But for purposes of the development code, which is looking at the physical characteristics of the building, we have the micro unit code, we have multifamily apartment building codes, and then how those rents are operated is a somewhat separate question, I think, from the development code, but there may be opportunity for different types of buildings that haven't been considered yet.
Yeah, so we can kind of work with that between now and the next meeting and come back with another category. I think we could do it, and just, it would be like in the definitions, and the standard would be, you know, the requirement that these types of facilities would have a management piece to it and a subsidized funding piece. I'm sure we can work something out. I think that's a good idea.
One example, Susanna, is we do have certain standards in the development code for when a particular project, whatever the type of building, is deed restricted for affordable housing. We have a whole section in the development code about different parking standards, you know, just all different standards that apply when your building is deed restricted to a certain income population.
Okay.
Susanna, speaking to that management piece, a little more context with what Kathy was talking about. Dignity Village actually does have on-site management too. The village that she was talking about that has the ability to stay there with no time limit. They partner with Join to provide that case management piece.
Okay, good, thank you. I'll look into that. Okay, so why don't we go, let's see. I don't see anyone else with some questions. So why don't we go through each of these and make sure that these are definitions in draft that we have come up with. And we can go over each of the type and the definition to make sure we're capturing everything and we're not being too restrictive in our definitions. And I'll take notes and everything. So the first type of shelter kind of concept we were thinking of is a mass shelter. So it's a large gathering space with the sleeping area not separated. I guess this would fall into the low barrier shelter model. So, you know, it's what we think of when we think of the warming shelter, Shepherd's House, other mass shelters that have been, you know, put up. So it's a building that contains one or more sleeping areas or is divided by non-permanent partitions furnished with cots, floor mats, or bunks, temporary overnight accommodation of people who are homeless. We could change that to houseless if we want to, or lack permanent housing. The shelter may or may not have food prep or shower facilities. Does that look okay to everybody? Is there anything we've missed? I'm not hearing anybody, so I think maybe we're okay on that one. Of course, this is in draft. It can continue and evolve, but this will provide us with some baseline. Yeah, this looks good. And then we can start working on the next step, kind of. Sound okay? Okay. So one thing about the mass shelter to think of for the next few meetings when we talk about zoning districts and different things that fit in zoning districts, Salem, and I put it in the memo, did kind of some limitations on the number of beds by zoning district. And so that's something we could put in the back of our head for a future meeting to start thinking about if we wanted to, you know, allow larger ones in industrial, things like that. You know, smaller beds, maybe only 15 or something like that in a residential area, to provide some opportunity for some smaller, more dispersed accommodations around the city. So that's just something to put in people's back of people's thoughts. Okay.
Susanna, does the element of time have a place here to help better understand? Some cases, I'm imagining that there is a matrix here that goes from short-term, as little as overnight, to permanent, and it goes from temporary, or you know, from time it's short-term to long-term, temporary to permanent. I just wonder if time has an element or a place in the discussion of these shelters.
Stacy or Dana, do you have any input on that, on the management of these as far as time?
I'm sorry, you cut out for 1 second. I lost my internet. Can you repeat that, Hans? My apologies.
I'm wondering, for the purposes, for the many things that we're talking about, including the complexity of all this, if the element of time has a place as we look at these many different types of shelter spaces. Does time have a place, whether it's overnight or 30 days, and I'm thinking in terms of some of the pushback or the concerns that we heard in the NLA survey, were the idea, and this came up, those of us that were involved in the micro-unit discussion, there was some concern that, oh, well, you need to have no subletting or no short-term rentals, or it needs to be 30 days or greater. So I know that there's some concern about the time element, but also in terms of, as we describe shelters, I'm wondering if it's appropriate to attach a time element to these different types of shelters. And if that doesn't have a place in the conversation, then not.
So I'll give you my opinion. If we're talking about a mass shelter type situation like the warming shelter, I don't see like someone coming in and giving them a week or 30 days. I think that we keep that unlimited time. But one of the things I think we've run into personally with the isolation motel is that people that were moved into the isolation motel have now been there 8 to 10 months. And it is just human nature that when we know we have 8 or 10 months or an indefinite period of time, we maybe do not address things as kind of importantly as we need to. And that's both on the side of the guest and case management. So I think that we do need to have some time restrictions on those types of programs, and it can be tied to goals as well. So someone's working on housing, they're doing everything they need to be doing, or they're working on other goals. We can flex with that. We hate to exit someone if they're 3 weeks away from getting permanent housing, and then there's triggers and all these other things that come in. So I think it depends on which shelter type that we're doing. Safe car parking does not have a limit right now on timing, but we are working daily with those folks. So I do think mass shelter, untimed, personal opinion, I do think our other settings do need some time limits attached to goal plans, which should be co-created with our guests or unhoused community members.
I echo everything that Stacy has said. You can't really put a time restriction on wildfire, heat, or cold. It's a safety thing. So, winter shelters, no limit. And yeah, I was going to give examples of, for instance, in Kenton Women's Village, we would do case plans with the residents and kind of have benchmarks, that we hope to have this success by this date and this success by this date, and then kind of look at it and where we are, and if we extend or if there needs to be some sort of exception or so basically I just want to echo and agree that everything that Stacy said.
Okay, great. Lynn?
I was just going to jump in and say what I just heard both of these amazing folks say is that is very much a management decision and probably not best for the development code. So I just wanted to kind of cut through and make sure. The reason is that as time evolves, the needs evolve, our housing market continues to change. And so the management of each of these facilities is best poised to make those decisions. What has happened is even HUD regulates the heck out of all this, I'll tell you, that. And what has happened is even HUD has sort of begun to retool some of their parameters based on the challenges of COVID, of the housing markets that we are operating in, et cetera. And so keeping it in the development code is a pretty, although Ben does a lot of work on our code, pretty stagnant approach, I'll say, and doesn't really allow for the flexibilities that are sometimes needed to meet best practices. So I would strongly encourage this group to leave those decisions up to the management of and the operators of these buildings, not in the development code. And I'm sure that each one of them can provide whoever needs it with the parameters for operating and what that looks like.
Okay, Stacy, I wanted to ask you, you use the term isolation shelter or isolation hotel. Is that for the COVID?
Yes, that's for, I wish we had another name for it, but yes, that is for our high risk and those folks that are COVID positive that the Neighbor Impact is managing. I'm doing case management, and I know Deschutes County Behavioral Health is doing case management out there right now.
Okay, great. Okay, so does it sound like we've sort of captured everything in the mass shelter definition and concept with maybe some caveats? It doesn't sound like we're going to do any sort of thing with time. Sound good? Sound okay? Maybe
I just had one question. Are we going to, there's food preparation and shower facilities. Is there any, would we want to include laundry facilities in that as well?
What do you think, Stacy or Dana? I don't know how restrictive we want to be. I'm sure most of them probably have that, but.
So I'm a little concerned. I know that I'll use Shepherd's House for an example where the warming shelter is. That property does not have food preparation on site. So they rely on volunteers to bring in food and bring food from the main house. And then the shower facilities is usually a shower truck. There's not on-site showers, and there's definitely no on-site laundry. I think we're having so many challenges finding land and property to do these shelters. I hate to restrict them too much. One of the other models, I wish I had more time to do this. I have seen shower trucks have converted to do laundry where you can do those mobile. So I think keeping that maybe a little looser is going to be important, so we don't eliminate a lot of facilities that may be in great locations and great setups otherwise.
Yeah, I was thinking about, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, could it say, instead of saying may or may not, just say is recommended to have access to food, shower, laundry, where, I mean, make it a little bit, I think those are great components to have, but I think Stacy's right that there's plenty of facilities that won't necessarily have all of those things because they're an existing building or whatever that might be. But I think it's a great thing to recommend.
We could put something like that. Yeah, I agree. We want to make it as easy as possible. I mean, I'm thinking about high school gyms and things like that in the summers that might need, who knows, maybe someday we'd want to do that, or a Parks District facility or something like that. So what do folks think? We could put something in here. It is recommended, but.
Susanna, if I could, I think it sounds like there's two elements that are being talked about. One is sort of what are the standards? What would we want required to be included or possible to be included? And what are the basic elements of, just to define what a mass shelter is? And so I think we want to set the standards in the code itself and not the definition. But I think all of these, you know, could be part of the definition, could be standards, depending on how the discussion goes. And then I think there's also the question, and I think this is a standards question, of what would be required for a temporary mass shelter, maybe one that's sited at a high school gym only for a summer, and what would be required at a mass shelter that's permanently located in a particular location. So I think those are two things to keep in mind as you think about what is the definition of a mass shelter and what are the standards for citing a mass shelter.
That makes sense to me. I would think the piece about the food prep and the shower would not be part of the definition in that case, but it would be part of the standards.
Okay.
In terms of standards, I would just ask the experts, is there a place in the standards to talk about access to transportation? I know that that's been an issue that's come up before. Would that be dialogue that would be recommended, if you would, be accessible to transportation? And I'm asking the houseless experts here.
You know, one thing I found when we did, when First Presbyterian Church did the smoke shelter, there wasn't really great access to transportation. So we were easily able to work with CET to change that. It's almost easier to work with CET to get to locations on the bus route than to find a location on the bus route sometimes. So, you know, I think that could be a working component. And CET was wonderful in navigating that with First Press. So just keep that in mind, because land closer in with more accessibility is going to be fewer and far between, and cost is going to be much greater. But I think it's important that there is some way that we make sure people do have transportation. So I don't know if that's more confusing, but I guess my point is that working with transportation might be the easiest way rather than location.
I would say from a, and this is longer term, from a funding standpoint, usually if you're getting some type of state or federal funding, there are, for this type of housing, there's usually rules or points that are scored better, and they include transportation. So I would think the development code wouldn't have to encompass that piece if there's other modes of getting it.
It seems like with transportation and with shower facilities and food prep, we're talking about two different mass shelters. I mean, there's the mass shelters that arise because of events that are temporary in a gym or something like that. And then there's ones that are going to be more permanent. And I feel like some of the more permanent ones, it'd be nice to have. I feel like having the requirements of access to transportation, shower, laundry, food, that kind of thing, seems like it makes more sense there, but not necessarily, not for the ones that are because of a natural disaster or something like that, that just needs to be put up temporarily.
Scott, I think that's a great point. I think me reading all of the different things, I kept reading in event of an emergency and homeless, so they were like merged together. So I was considering them two different buckets, but I don't think it's spelled out that way, but I think that would be important.
Yeah, okay. So I think the group has kind of agreed that we should probably take the shower stuff out and put it in a standards type of thing instead, and just leave the definition basic. And I think it would be good to have, like Medford has the severe shelter, concept that, they have wildfires and all kinds of stuff, but we could have that too. And usually that type of stuff is allowed under an emergency declaration that the city manager can make, which is what he's used to allow the winter warming shelter, because it's not allowed in our zoning code over the past like 10 years. So so what we're doing and what we've done actually is make it allowable now, which is really great without an emergency declaration. So I think maybe we should have two definitions, one for a severe or, a severe event shelter and one for a permanent one, and talk about that. So we can kind of work with that for next time, if that sounds good. Yeah, okay. I can only see like 3 of you. So I'm like, okay, let's see. Okay, so moving along, the next type of shelter type we were envisioning is the outdoor shelter site. So this is from Eric Tobiason's The Veterans Village. And by the way, they've got a great website with a flyover concept plan type thing. If you go to the website, it's really cool. So anyway, so it's the tiny home type of thing that we've seen in different places, but it also includes the managed camp concept. So this is from Medford's managed camp. When they had the fires and stuff, they set up a managed urban campground, and now it's been so successful, it's actually moving towards these pallet shelters. Has everyone seen pallet shelters? They've got kind of a slick marketing thing, and they've got a good product that's being used a lot. So this picture is going in Bend soon, which is really exciting. This is Hope Village in Medford, and this is the managed camp in Medford. This is in Santa Clara, California. And what's interesting is that they've got like the community building is powered by solar. So it's saving them like $300,000 a year in utility bills, which is pretty cool. And I think this is for single women and families only. So, but pallet shelters are popping up all over the place. And actually in Medford, they're expanding their campground and replacing them with pallet shelters. So they'll have sites for 120, I think. The council just approved that. So this is kind of the concept we thought of with the outdoor shelter site. Not a long definition, it's just a lot or parcel on which mobile or temporary units are placed for use as transitional shelter. So, and then these are the examples. This would also cover Eugene's microsites concept, which is, there was a picture of that in the memo of City of Eugene is a little different than us, and they own, they're under jurisdiction for their parks district. So they have a lot of different land opportunities that we don't have. And so they've turned a whole bunch of kind of mini parks and different slivers of land into microsites that has between, I think, 12 to 25 folks, sort of with the Conestoga hut type things. So anyway, this is the outdoor shelter site. Anyone have thoughts on that? Again, we said transitional shelter. I don't know if we need to look at a permanent type thing. Anyone?
Do these usually have, I'm assuming, restroom facilities? They're not part of the buildings, are they? Restroom and making a food prep or anything?
Yeah, no, at least the ones I've looked at. Eric, maybe you can talk about Veterans Village, but they have like a community building. So they've got their own private thing. And then there's a kitchen and laundry and Wi-Fi, library, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, that is shared.
I've seen a couple that then tie a requirement to the having restroom facilities. It can be a separate building, not within these mobile units. I think that could be really important as part of a feature as these are developed. I don't know that you would want to stick these out on a lot somewhere where they didn't have those type of resources just from a development standpoint. Then they could become more of a, you're going to put your garbage somewhere, you're going to need to go to the restroom somewhere. And if you're providing the housing and then you don't provide any of that, what is that going to look like? And I think it would open up the opportunity to place it in more zones if that was a tied requirement to having this type of development.
Yeah, that would be in the standards, and we definitely would require some sort of restroom. Yeah, like either communal type of thing or in each unit. But I think providing it in each unit, although it would be nice, would probably add to the expense for the developer. But
100% agree.
Yeah. Even our safe parking program requires sanitation and hand washing stations because of COVID and stuff like that. So Eric, I see you raised your hand. Go ahead. Eric, are you on? Let's see. See, he raised his hand, but he can't talk. Let me see.
I think he's not a panelist, so he can't mute for some reason.
Oh, really? I thought I promoted him. Let's see.
Okay, there we are.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I got disconnected and reconnected.
Okay.
Panelist, so thank you for re-admitting me. Yeah, so we discovered with the building code that restrooms are definitely a requirement for public health and general sanitation, and I think it's a good idea. And we decided to put individual restrooms in each of our shelters because at nighttime in the winter, if you have to use the restroom, it's it could be hazardous to health to go outside to a common building or a community area. Generally with bad winter conditions, that was our concern. It did add a ton of cost to the project, but we think it's something for safety and dignity and basic health. So just a vote to require restrooms at least on site, if not within the units. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about originally. It was just something for the whole facility, not necessarily for each individual unit.
Yeah. So Elizabeth or Pauline, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be not in the definitions, but the standards. So we'll make sure that's in the standards.
As someone who has more knowledge than me, how are managed camps in terms of usually run in terms of trash, sanitation, obviously, restrooms, that kind of thing? Does anyone have any sort of examples of? Is it usually just porta potties and dumpsters, or is it beyond that? Does anyone know?
I've seen several different models. I've seen those that have porta potties. I've also seen it kind of what I would call like a campground style, where you would have a couple, per site, you'd have a facility with bathrooms, and there's usually kind of dumpsters on site for trash removal. And some really engage and empower the guests to be part of security and cleanup. So there's a lot of different models.
I can also
Sorry,
Stacy. I can also add at the Kenton Women's Village, the first rendition, because it's now it's been its second stage since I've left, but there were truck trailers. What are those things called? That were converted to a kitchen. And then we had one converted so that it was plumbed, flushable toilets and showers. And also that first location, we didn't have running water, so we installed a water tank that we filled.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think as far as the type of housing and the definition, we're probably okay on this on this concept, and then we can come back with some standards and things like that.
Sorry, not to,
no, go ahead.
You were just wrapping up.
No, it's okay, I couldn't see you.
The definition including the temporary. So I understand temporary in the sense of it's mobile, like it doesn't have a foundation, but does the word temporary then confuse the other definition of temporary, meaning like the people are maybe there temporarily. So I don't know necessarily what the better word would be, but I do think there's a difference between the type of construction that this building is versus the people that are maybe using it.
Yeah, and that brings up a point too. I mean, is there any reason these couldn't be permanent? I don't know, Pauline or Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts on that? I think we were thinking about the tiny home concept and non-permanent structures, but I don't know that there's any reason they couldn't be.
So I think I would ask Pauline if there are building code standards for super tiny homes on sort of micro units on individual foundations. I think we've had this conversation internally with our buildings department that there runs into an issue with, are there any standards codes to apply if you put something on a foundation, whereas I think there are codes that are applied by other entities for mobile facilities. So I think that's a question to look into. How could we, is there a code to apply to a micro unit on a foundation to ensure safety or not? I think that was a question that had come up previously. And I don't know, Pauline, if you have any further information.
I don't know if Pauline's on.
I'm not hearing Pauline.
She might have jumped off.
This is Colin. I can
oh, hey, Colin.
Jump in real quick. That really is a question for the building division staff, either Joe or Billy. I know that they do have some flexibility as the building official to make exceptions to the building code or adapting the building code to meet certain things. But really, they really need to be in the room for that discussion.
Okay, we can talk to them and get some information for next time.
Quite a bit during the Veterans Village initial discussions, and so yeah, go to them.
Okay.
Could I add? I think there are building code issues, and I think Eric found that with the Veterans Village regarding foundation and and having to have bathrooms, what they are required to meet the building code. So there would need to be some revisions or workaround for that. I would just be aware that there are building code issues, and I agree with Colin, it needs to be a discussion with them.
Yeah, I mean, just to chime in 30 seconds, we needed structural engineer to design a sound home, and you can't it wouldn't work with like a Conestoga hut or a tent, that wouldn't meet building code. So I think the fact that all these state bills require the shelters to meet building code, presupposes that it's going to be structurally sound and have a foundation, have tie downs for wind, take snow loading, things that Conestoga huts and tents won't do. So definitely need to factor that in.
Okay, so we'll get some clarification and maybe even have somebody from building here next time. Let's see. Pauline, are you on? Can you hear now? Or can we hear you? No one can see me or hear me. I've made you a co-host, but I don't know what else to do.
I saw her for a second and then she disappeared.
Okay.
We can see you, but we can't hear you, Pauline.
Pauline, on your mute, your microphone button, next to it, there's an app arrow, and there are different sections, one for speakers, one for microphone. If you select a different device under the microphone section and give it a try.
It's okay.
No.
Pauline, if you want to just call my cell, I can hold it up also. That's a little clunky, but we'll get to there.
Pauline, I can also send you the call-in information. And if you want to call into the meeting, you can use your phone for audio if you like. I'll email it to you right now.
That's weird because you were on before and I don't know what happened. Okay. Okay, so anyway, so it sounds like we've got the basic nuts and bolts for this type of housing or shelter type. And okay, she's emailing me. Keep going. Okay, and we will come back with some information on the building codes and things like that. And we need to make sure restrooms, garbage, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, of course, it's in the standards for sure. So, okay, going on to the next one. This is the hotel into a individual rooms for folks. So I think we've already kind of talked about this, that maybe we should look at adding the micro unit idea that isn't transitional, but for long-term.
So Susanna, I've emailed to you the link to Argyle Gardens and a presentation by Holtz Architecture in Portland that is about what I was talking about. So you can look at that later and get a better idea of what I was talking about.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah. Okay. Are folks okay with this permanent facility with individual rooms? Pretty basic.
Yes, and I don't know that this is the place, but I do think that within City of Bend, it's warranted to talk about density. And so I think this one is an opportunity to have a higher density than maybe some of the other ones. And so tying that together as far as having, multi-story buildings or something like that for individual rooms and short-term shelters.
Okay, great. And maybe varying density by zoning district. Is that where you're?
So we've been working on getting rid of density entirely in our HB 2001 process. And I know Pauline is still muted, so she might chip in later, but we're basically ignoring density. And so I'm not sure how that is going to factor into this, but just want to let you know, we've been working on the density issue.
Got it. What can I ask what the objective is as far as moving away from it, that it just opens it up for multiple varieties, or that you don't want density? Sorry.
Oh no, to get more density, but it's looking at it in terms of lot size, lot coverage, setbacks, heights, and let that rule rather than FAR and density. But I may be misstating that, and if Pauline can get back on, she might say something different, but the emphasis has been to sort of getting away. Maybe Scott's going to kind of add
well, I don't think you could do this in an RS zone, even with the stuff that we were talking about with the HB 2001. And I can't remember what the density calc for micro units is. I know it's not a 1-for-1. And I was kind of wondering about, because micro units is mentioned here, and with micro units, they actually might be a little bit more restrictive for converting some of these, because we have requirements for public spaces and kitchens and things like that, there might need to be some remodeling that would happen with some of these places to provide for that public space. And maybe having the short-term shelter, you could use micro units as a starting off point, and maybe have a slightly different definition for these conversion projects, especially.
jump in.
If I could, one of the ways of differentiating types of shelter across different zoning areas we saw in other cities, and I think this was Salem, excuse me, is not using the density concept necessarily, but using the number of units or number of people served. So for example, we do have shelters in town that are essentially just located in what looks like from the outside a single family home that currently exists in standard density residential areas, or maybe RM, I'm not sure. But so in the standards for these, we could think of larger scale short-term shelters like a hotel conversion, and then smaller scale short-term shelters like a residential home that essentially functions as a group home for a particular group of people who are houseless otherwise. So I think that may be a concept to consider as a kind of not a density necessarily, but a size of service.
And that's something, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, and that's something too that we'll bring back to the other types of housing, because we were wondering too, like, you know, if you have a city lot, what is the reasonable size for the number of units on that lot? So we'll do some checking and see about that. We have Don's house right now, which is allowed under our safe parking program, but it's 5 RVs, and I think they want to add on, and the site is just too small. So it started us thinking about, well, if we're talking about the temporary outside shelter, outdoor shelter, and the tiny home concept, what is the right size, and do we need to have standards for those by zoning district? So sorry, somebody else wanted to talk. Stacy?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Is there currently a code that says how many unrelated adults or unrelated people you can have in a single family home? So if we had kind of that group home type situation, I didn't know if there was any codes around that.
Yeah,
I don't believe we regulate. Oh, sorry, Kathy, do you think we do?
Yeah, five unrelated people in a home is my understanding. Lynn, am I right on that?
So that is specific to sort of when business registry, I think, might kick in. And Elizabeth, stop me if I'm, but my understanding is we do not regulate occupancy in any way because of the fair housing component and family size.
So yeah, where does the 5 people come in then? You're saying it's a business?
I think that's the point where we're starting to look at that as more of a commercial situation instead of sort of a personal. If there's rentals going on, I'll have to do a little digging around. I could be getting that 100% wrong. I think our goal is to not regulate what makes up a household. That gets really dangerous really quickly with fair housing issues. And so I think that's what we are trying to avoid. So we may have sort of a business threshold, at which point a certain number of rentals happening in one place kind of takes on a different character, but that has a lot less to do with the development code. So I'll have to kind of dig in a little and see where I can find any info on that. I've heard that, but I haven't seen it in print for a long time. So
I think we've found that if it depends on who's running it. So like if a Shepherd's House or a Bethlehem Inn was operating a home as a group home, then those regulations kick in versus somebody just having access to a home and whoever's within that home can live there. So I think we see it probably more when we're trying to do bigger developments that we run into that.
Yeah, I thought we had something for a group home for like a foster home. Is Colin, I don't know if he can unmute, but I'm pretty sure we have something for that. We can find information and bring it back. And Barb, I saw you had your hand raised.
I live next door to a facility that is owned and operated by Telecare. So I think Brianna might actually have figured it out. I think that if it's some sort of external running the home, then it's 5 unrelated individuals. But I think you guys might also be correct that if it's just 6 unrelated individuals who all want to live in a house together, I don't think the city regulates it that way. I understood if that's what Brianna was saying. I think she figured it out for us.
Yeah, that was what I was saying. And just to, not to, if there's other comments on this, I think it can continue, but I did want to say for the short-term shelter piece, I do think that we should differentiate between them. It doesn't seem like they're micro units. That I envision that maybe these are more for families than individuals, where micro units could be more for individual use, or just the setup of them is not, it might be appealing to different types of people that they are serving. So maybe there's a way to articulate that in the definition.
Yeah, micro units also have a square footage that it has to be kept under, and some of these units might already be over that. So, I think micro units is a great starting out point for looking at this type of facility. I just don't think it should be. I don't think you should refer to micro unit standards or whatever for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, so we'll work on the idea of this being not only a temporary type shelter, but a longer term facility, but maybe not so much like the micro unit concept, because it would be too restrictive. Hans?
Yeah, just a question. So going down the road a piece, when we're going to recommend code changes, this says short term. I don't know what we have in mind, what short term means. I don't know if that's less than 30 days. I don't know the time frame. I'm all for understanding the metric, but thinking about a code that we're going to recommend or code changes we're going to recommend, I'm wondering, where does time frame work into these codes? And maybe they don't, but I'd hate to see us start going down a path of breaking things down into short-term, long-term, and defining it, only to find out that we recommend a change that actually runs into something that can't be implemented legally or conceptually. I'm not expressing myself very well, I'm afraid, but I guess the first question is, what is short-term, and can we define that, and can it be a standard in a BEN code for this type of shelter?
Yeah, no, I think that's important, yeah.
And I think it should be called a permanent shelter for, and then say time frame or short term. You know, people are confused. They're thinking that it's only going to be there for a short period of time. They don't understand it's the people that are there for a short period of time. So I think it would be important to say permanent shelter for, and then XYZ.
Or maybe there's no time associated with it. Maybe it is just a like a, I don't know, individual unit shelter. I don't know what the right word is, but it's not dictating time. It's dictating the type of shelter that it is.
Yeah, we're hitting out on exactly the conversation Pauline and I had as we were coming up with these examples for you, is what do we call this type of shelter? And so keep brainstorming, because we don't know either.
I can look at other cities and steal some stuff. So
can we just call it a shelter? I mean, I guess maybe I'm confused. I don't know about the management piece of this, but is there something that restricts how long people can stay in these beyond development code? I mean, can it just be shelter?
It's probably the management parameters of the organization that's managing it.
Because it seems like if we call it, even if we say permanent shelter or permanent facility or permanent building for short-term shelter, then we're kind of implying that it's for a certain period of time, when maybe that we don't even need to have that conversation, or we could just take it out.
Maybe you could look at it like how the residential component is. So there's like multifamily housing, there's short-term housing, and it defines like less than, I don't remember exactly what it is, but less than 3 months, more than 3 months, and it dictates the code standards from there. So maybe there's just an overarching shelter or, housing that then gets sub-categorized into short-term, long-term micro units from there.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there were funds that were only available, if it was for a very temporary thing or whatever. So I guess people who've managed these things, is there is there some sort of legal definition outside development code that would restrict or control time?
I don't know if I have the answer about time, but I was just listening, and I was going to mention that I have managed emergency shelters, and typically the place I was employed was Transition Projects. It was emergency shelter if it was in the unfortunate position of not having like case management. And it was literally a place where we were giving people protection from the elements and a place to keep their things. And then when you get into programs where there are case management and perhaps other expectations to be there, those would be called short-term residential programs. I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Well, these are all good points. So why don't we do some thinking about, I'll get with Pauline and Elizabeth and think about some ideas for what this type of thing is called and whether we need to identify the temporary, the permanent. I agree, it gets confusing when you're talking about the permanent structure for temporary housing or something. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so good input on that one. And just a time check, we've got 15 more minutes or 12 more minutes or something. So, and we've got one more just type of transitional housing. And that's a pretty basic one. It's RVs as an ancillary use to a single family dwelling. And we have an allowance right now with our wildfire emergency code for a person to be able to provide a place for a relative to stay in their driveway in an RV. And then we also have the medical hardship emergency where with a doctor's notice, you can have the same allowance. But this comes up a lot. It causes quite a bit of angst in some neighborhoods, but it is a type of potential use. Eugene is implementing it. Portland is implementing it too, although they're taking some grief about it, that they're relying on it too much to solve their houselessness issues. But it's just another tool in the toolbox for property owners to use to house either a relative. It doesn't even need to be a relative. Eugene's does not have the requirement that folks are related to the people in the primary dwelling. But anyway, that's another type, another option. Do people have input on that, or Elizabeth, Pauline, or Colin, do you have anything to add to that?
So right now, our development code does not allow the use of an RV as a dwelling unit. What we have right now is called medical hardship housing. And I think the question is, how, if at all, do you want to expand or change or add another type of use? And right now, medical hardship housing is limited to a family member who has a medical reason that they need to live on site with other family members. And it can only be a manufactured dwelling or home. It cannot be an RV. So I think the question is there something else?
I have one question, and this might be a naive question, but would this supersede any CC&Rs in the neighborhood, or do the CC&Rs take precedent?
Nothing in the Bend development or code would supersede CC&Rs.
Now, I know with HB 2001, there was a conversation about any CC&Rs that were implemented before House Bill 2001 was enacted that the HOA can say no, you can't build this way, but doesn't, with HB 2001, doesn't that prevent future CC&Rs from restricting that type of development? And maybe that's something we can put in here, because I know I don't think they allow RVs in my neighborhood, but if we have something in there to make it so that future HOAs aren't able to restrict them, I think that'd be important.
So that's right, Scott. I think there's a couple approaches the legislature has taken They actually, so racial covenants were overridden by the Supreme Court. Those are not enforceable to the extent they exist in CC&Rs. The Oregon legislature has passed legislation to override certain watering requirements if there's a climate emergency or a drought. I think there's also consideration of overriding prohibitions on family child care homes, for example. So it is an element that I think the legislature has looked at. How and when would the legislature on a statewide level override certain CC&Rs, but it wouldn't be, and then that would apply, in some instances, they've made those restrictions apply to CC&Rs that are adopted or amended after the adoption of the statewide legislation. So that's how the statewide legislature has approached CC&Rs.
I have a question. I thought that we were allowing 72-hour parking of RVs on the street. Is that a separate conversation than this?
Yeah. So our parking code allows parking of a vehicle in the right-of-way for up to 72 hours.
This is on somebody's property, so their driveway or, or other area. Yeah.
So I thought we were doing something a little different with our parking, our emergency parking that was allowing the use of the RVs. I don't know, Elizabeth, could you explain that?
Yes. So council just adopted what we call a safe parking program, which is not in the development code and is not a land use decision or anything that would be permanently allowed on any property, but it would be a programmatic use allowed if a property owner or a lessee applied. And so what that does is allow a property owner to say, I'm going to allow overnight parking for up to 3 vehicles on most non-residential properties throughout the city, or apply for approval from the city for up to 6 vehicles or cars on private property. And the difference between the program allowed under the municipal code and development allowed under the development code is somewhat nuanced, but the development code would require a land use application and then would be sort of a permanent approval for a certain use. Whereas under the municipal code, it's a limited duration. I think we have an annual approval process and an annual application process for the 6 vehicles.
Thank you for explaining that. So we're looking at it on the screen right now. Okay, so that's something that would have to be renewed annually if it was decided it was worth continuing. Is that correct?
So the code is permanent and the application from the property owner or the lessee would be annual for the 6 vehicles, the transitional overnight parking. And the allowance of up to 3 vehicles for overnight camping is also a permanent part of the code, and no application to the city is required.
So the difference with the RV on as an ancillary use is that it's like anybody could do it, I guess, unless your CC&R has prevented it. You know, you could provide a space for somebody, whereas a safe parking program is related to a nonprofit or entity to provide case management.
So REACH is providing safe car parking at Nativity Lutheran Church. We've been there since November, and we can have up to 6 vehicles. We have a porta potty, a hand washing station, and then 6 days a week we have case management that goes out. And it's been really successful. It's not very expensive to run. And we have so far, out of the 7 vehicles that have been there, 4 have transitioned into permanent housing, and we've got a new group of folks in there. And that's because of the daily case management and the collaboration with other social service agencies. We're not doing it on our own. So it's a great program. Our biggest barrier is we have not been able to find other churches due to insurance and a number of other things. So we're working on it, and the city has been really helpful and instrumental in helping support this program.
That's great. That is great. I have a question on the RV as an ancillary use. So I think one of the benefits would be that obviously a lot of people could participate and you could provide a lot of housing. could a disadvantage be that they become more of an Airbnb that isn't then solving the problem that we're trying? And maybe that's a good or bad. I don't. It could be good or it could be bad. But I'm just wondering if there needs to be something. Would there be more pushback or less pushback if one of those became the norm of how this code was used or how this type was used?
Yeah, that is definitely, you know, an issue, and it would take a lot of resources from our code enforcement department, I think, to keep up on this, which would, you know, it has an implication for staffing and everything. So
sure,
it's something we could come back to. It definitely is probably one of the most, one of the more controversial, you know, options for folks. So yeah, we could do some research specifically on this. And you know, I think if someone was to apply for it, it would probably be similar to the medical hardship type of application. They'd probably have to renew it annually and, you know, verify that it was for a relative that needed help and not as a short-term rental. So yeah, I don't know if Colin or Pauline, if she can speak, has anything else to add on that. So I think just because we have just 4 more minutes left, I think we've made it through most of the types of shelters. So the next meeting, we're gonna begin to make recommendations for standards in each district by type of shelter. I have a bunch of notes on the slides that I'll get to you all in follow up, but it seems like, and I'm gonna stop sharing. Can't seem to stop sharing because I have a box on top of my share. There we go. Okay, hi. So it seems like we have pretty good agreement on the first couple types of housing, the mass shelter, the outdoor sites, and let's see, the short-term shelter, although we're gonna look at something different to call it, to not imply that it has to be short-term, with a bunch of caveats. So I'll get notes back to everybody to make sure we're on the right track. Does that sound okay? And I see a couple of raised hands now that Rachel, did you have your hand raised? No, okay. I don't think I see any more raised hands. Okay.
Susanna,
yeah.
Would you mind forwarding to everybody the link that I gave to you for the Argyle Gardens and to help explain what it was that I was talking about? I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Oh yeah, and I think I'm gonna start a Teams page or something like that where you guys can post stuff and have access to it. So everybody can do that. Is there anything else, Megan, before we adjourn? No?
No, just thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this was good.
There are some hands raised in the attendees.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Do we have a minute to hear from folks again? Yeah, okay. Luke, I'm gonna unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And I definitely appreciate what happened today. I do think that all of this is going to be great in the long run, but there are actively things that could be happening on a day-to-day basis that would help change the perception of the greater community versus the houseless population, including just basic trash pickup. That's something that grassroots mutual aid orgs are doing at the moment right now. And we are having a struggle continuing to make that happen just based on funding. And the funding is not too much. And that's something that would immediately just change at least one aspect of what people are complaining about, that these camps are an eyesore. as soon as the trash gets picked up, they look 100 times better. So the fact that that's not being brought up in the second meeting now is pretty annoying, honestly.
Okay, thanks. See if we can do something about that. Okay, and Mike, I'm gonna unmute you. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so kind of like Luke did, I'd like to just briefly go back to one of your first topics, that being public perception and houselessness, and about the desire to do some public relations work around changing that narrative. In particular, there seems to be this mythology around the idea, maybe you've heard it before, if you build it, they will come. This idea that more services will attract more houseless people, they'll commit more crimes, they'll do more drugs, et cetera, et cetera. As Scott Winters mentioned, this idea was repeated many times by Bend police officers in the document that Peacekeepers just received as part of a public records request. So to that point, I want to tell a story about one human being, my friend. In my own work as doing volunteer outreach work, I've made a good friend who's given me permission to talk about this. He's been houseless for many years, and during that time, he struggled with addiction. When we first met him, he was skeptical of even talking to us at all. But over time, we brought him food and clothing and showers and the regular trash collection services that Luke was just talking about. And after John Riggs bought his garbage truck, my friend called me and told me about a decision he had made. Because of the services that he had been receiving from these volunteers, he said he felt loved and seen for the first time in as long as he could remember. And so that inspired him to actually leave town. He's not in Bend now. He found a safe place to go to and try to avoid the temptation of drugs and alcohol. And right now he calls me every day. As of today, he's been sober for either 10 or 11 days. He doesn't know if he can keep it up, but he's trying really, really hard. So quite the opposite of this mythology of if you build it, they will come. This is the story of a human being who felt like somebody in the world loves him and sees him. So he actually left. He actually left Bend, and he's working really hard to make a change in his life. And so the answer is just always more love. It's always more compassion. It's always more dignity. And so if we can let people know stories like that, I think we can change the narrative. And I probably talked longer than I was supposed to, and I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, does anyone have anything else before we adjourn? No, okay. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. I'll get out notes with follow-up stuff for next time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.